So I'm sitting in one of the courtrooms at the immigration courthouse in Santa Ana. I am there because a woman and her family has asked me to accompany them to the hearing. I'd met this woman only briefly, maybe about 30 minutes we had together before going into the courtroom. She doesn't speak much English. I don't speak much Spanish. So there's a lot of looking happening, but not a lot of talking. She holds herself steady there in that space. She sits up straight. She looks at the judge. I know she is anxious, but she holds herself with a kind of regal quality that is unmistakable. She's there in that courtroom because she's been here in the United States for 40 years. She came in with a passport and visa that now can't be found for reasons I'll tell you about later. But the court wants that paperwork now. And we sit there, and as she talks to her family and they translate for me, she begins telling her story, and I hear a story about a woman whose family and friends, that network of people, had always, as far as she'd known, spread from Mexico across that border into California. This was all her family had ever known. They were part of these areas for as far back as they could remember. And for her to come to the United States was simply to be able to be with another part of her family. And that's one of the reasons she had made that journey so long before. So we sit there in that courthouse, which is on the Hachiman, the Tongva, the Kizh land, and we sit there, and I am there as the support person, as the protector, offering what protection I can. And I think, how ironic that this woman, who looks in every way as though she should be here, is the one on trial that morning, whereas I, looking like I look, knowing that my family history does not stretch back in this region anywhere close to what her family history does, I can sit there safely and have no fear of being deported. Ironic, isn't it? As a Unitarian Universalist, in moments like these and times like we're living now, I want to dig in deep into our faith and ground myself there. And then I'm reminded as well in these moments in the courthouse that our faith comes out of the Enlightenment in Europe. Our faith comes out of early colonial America. Our faith is not rooted with indigenous people. And so I feel that disconnect. It was only maybe in the last 50, 60 years that Unitarian Universalists have really begun to acknowledge and embrace the traditions and theologies of indigenous people and recognize how much we have in common with our sense of what is interconnected, with our sense that the sacred is right here on earth, that it's important for us to nurture and care for our planet and one another. All of these things have made us much more aware of indigenous theology and ideas over the years, but, you know, it's still not where we're necessarily rooted. It is a journey that we are on. Clyde Grubbs is a Unitarian Universalist of Cherokee descent, and he says that we are two rivers, indigenous culture and Unitarian Universalist, two rivers seeking the same ocean. Meaning we come from different sources and different places, but we've recognized that our destination is the same. Our destination is a recognition of the holiness in relationship, the sacredness of being right here on this planet and living our lives with one another. Now that mother in the courtroom that morning, I wasn't alone with her. She had her 4 adult children with her, all born here in the United States. Their spouses were there, grandchildren at home, a couple of other relatives thrown in, me. We were a great big network of people. The judge asked the attorney, who are all these people? And the attorney started to explain, and then the judge said, oh, I get it, support people. And that's the truth. This mother knew how important it was to bring in that whole network of relationships and people to offer support in a moment like this. Those are healthy relationships. The relationship between this woman and this system, this immigration system here in the United States, that was the unhealthy relationship in that room that morning. That's where the system is broken, toxic. So who is this mother? Why is she here? Well, many years ago, as I said, almost 40 years ago, she had an opportunity to come be with part of her family here in the United States. She got a job. And some Americans said, we will make sure that you get your passport and your visa, and you can come and work for us. We'll take care of everything, and you'll be able to be with your family. And so she took that opportunity at a young age. When she got here, she discovered that the work that she would be required to do was much more than she had ever anticipated. Her passport, her visa, those papers were kept from her, and she was essentially stuck in a place that was exploiting her. Finally, after some months of being in this situation, she escaped in the middle of the night without the passport, without the visa. And now the court system says, we don't have record of that. And so they want to downgrade her to being an asylum seeker and not acknowledge how she came here and the 40 years that she spent here as a productive person in this country, raising a family, working, simply being present. This is what we're dealing with. But her story is not just the story of one indigenous person being treated this way. This is an old story that has been going on and on. That same old story of indigenous and brown bodies that have been used up by the system or tried to, and then punished for surviving. This is all part of that story. And then I think, as Dave mentioned earlier, I think about what we weren't taught along the way. Do people know about Cahokia? Do you know what Cahokia? So it was near what we now think of as St. Louis. Before Columbus, around 20,000 people, scholars believe, lived there in this city. It was a planned city. It had arts and culture. It was a trade center. They had the same problems that we know cities have of what to do with the sewage and how to govern and all those things. But a place I'd never heard about. You know, a place that certainly didn't fit in with my picture of pre-Columbus time of just mostly wilderness with a few Indians running around. So much was here that we've ignored. And as we've talked about in our Time for All Ages story, the Tongva people, the other different people who were here in Orange County in those times, so much of this there's been an attempt to erase these folks and their stories, their identities. And this mother in the courtroom is just another example of how that erasure continues in our world today. But as I thought about all of this, I thought about where culture, where history, where identity still often manages to survive, even in the most toxic of systems. And the place I thought of was the kitchen. And it reminds me of marrying into a Mexican-American family. And my mother-in-law, who was the daughter of a Mexican immigrant, used to just be delighted to tell us this story. She talked about how a white woman had married into the family, and that woman and her husband had invited this whole Mexican-American family over for dinner one night. And then when dinner was done, she was in the kitchen and she was cleaning up the kitchen, and she washed the dishes and she cleaned off the countertops and she put things away and she turned off the lights. And then another member of that family said very loudly, "Do you think you can close the kitchen in our family?" The kitchen is never closed in our family. She loved to tell that story. And I think there was a deeper meaning in it too, because that kitchen was a center of where culture had survived. The food that was made there was the food that was indigenous food, that had roots going way, way back. It was something that was always available as a place of comfort, as a place to remind people of who they were, how they were connected, how they could offer love to each other through nourishment. Just a really, really basic thing. Now, I did not grow up in a Mexican-American family. I married into one. I grew up in the Midwest, and I have Scottish roots, so didn't come out here until I was 18 to go to USC. And so my palate and dietary experience was fairly limited at that point. And very early on in our relationship, I came into the kitchen to find Lawrence cooking, and he had tortillas on the stove and taco meat and beans and rice, and everything was going in the kitchen. And I, with really the foolishness of youth, looked at all of that and said, "Oh, you're making Mexican food again." And Lawrence looked at me very pointedly and said, "No, I'm making food again." Ding! A light bulb went off for me, right? Because so much of it is about where we stand in our identity, how we understand ourselves. What's normal or expected or everyday so often depends upon our perspective. And that is the reality of what is happening right now. Because we're talking about people who are indigenous to this region, who have been in this area in a variety of ways going back thousands of years, and then there are other people now who say, "Oh, you can't be here in this way. Here are things you can't do. Here's how you can't be connected to family and loved ones. Here are places you're not allowed to go any longer." So much depends on our perspective and how we tell the story. As you know, we are in a time with immigration where it is very fraught. It's scary for people to go to the courthouse. That's why this mother wanted me along with them for what little I was able to do. And I'm sure this mother of 4 children knew her way around a kitchen as well. And here we were in that courthouse that day, and I was thinking about just back in 2021, it was when Biden's administration said that Indigenous Peoples Day was fully recognized for the first time. It was a beautiful statement about the contributions of Indigenous people, about what they had suffered, a statement about Christopher Columbus and how problematic that was, that even as we want to acknowledge that Italian immigrants were not treated well at one point in time, that the association with Christopher Columbus is, as I said, problematic at the very least. Beautiful statement in 2021. And I knew this week, as I'm thinking about this sermon, I thought, I know what the White House would have put out this week. And sure enough, they did. A reaffirmation of Christopher Columbus Day. And they didn't even mention Indigenous Peoples Day. I think there was just something about, efforts by left-wing people to dismantle Columbus Day or something like that. They didn't even mention it. Again, that erasure continues. It continues. That war against Indigenous people never really ended. The laws, the systems, the detention centers, that horrible alligator Alcatraz that was open for a period of time. These were all targeting, in so many cases, people of indigenous identity. And I'm sitting next to this mother in this courthouse, and she's just staring into the abyss of the system. And I'm thinking, what can we do? What can we do when immigration enforcement targets the very people who are most native to this land? And that's really the truth of where we're at. So, what happened that day in the courtroom? Well, and this, I think this typifies a lot of what's going on. Someone at her previous hearing had checked a box saying she was capable of having the hearing in English, that she spoke English well enough for that. Well, she didn't. And again, this talks about making assumptions, right? And how we override the needs of people right in front of us. But anyway, they were trying to proceed with this hearing in English, and fortunately her attorney said she needs this in Spanish, and there wasn't an interpreter available that day. So it really turned out to be a small miracle. She has 6 more months before the next hearing, and so we will be back for that one. But in that time, she is supposed to find that paperwork and bring that to court, which seems like an impossible thing for her to be able to do. And I think about what the world will look like in 6 months, and I don't know what the answer will be. I don't know what that next visit to the courthouse will be. But I will tell you, I have been finding these little glimmers of hope in the pockets of resistance I'm seeing in places. What's happening in Chicago, as challenging as it is to watch and listen to the stories about what's going on there with immigration and ICE, at the same time, I'm seeing people who are resisting. We have people, they made the Safe Schools Act there, so that kids, whatever their status, whether they are documented or undocumented, can sit in schools and be safe. They are working so hard there to make sure that they offer solid, real resistance. And that gives me a sense of hope, because it shows it is possible, and that there is a spirit here of understanding what we need to do at this particular time, because we are bound together. The Tongva people believe that what you put out into the world is what you get back. And I think that's an important thing for us to remember right now. On Indigenous Peoples Day, as much as I would like this to just be a day that we celebrated Indigenous people and their stories and their lives and their histories and their presence still in our communities, it's actually a day that we need to remind ourselves of what we need to do, that we need to align ourselves with those who need us most at this particular moment in time. And the need is as great or greater than anything I've seen in my lifetime. I don't know about you, but this is truly a pivotal moment. We are called to align ourselves with those who need our support most. And ultimately, I think we need to move the culture beyond the question of who does the land belong to, and instead begin to embrace the question of how do we belong to the land? How do we live in right relationship with one another? How do we as Unitarian Universalists acknowledge our truth that all things are connected, a truth that is also echoed in the theology of Indigenous people? Ultimately, the truth is we all belong to the land and we don't belong to the land, depending upon how we tell the story. Again, the question needs to be, how? How do we belong to the land? So as we witness everything happening in the world, whether it's this mother at the courthouse or whatever you may be seeing or experiencing, it is important for us to know that we have to truly be present to it all. that we are truly one, and that in some ways that mother in the courtroom is you, is me, is the ICE agent waiting outside, until we learn that lesson of how truly we are one with one another. We will continue in these times that we're in right now. And I dream of a time when we can make a place of real belonging, belonging that acknowledges what has been, belonging that embraces what is now and who is here now, and belonging that creates a space so that in the future everyone can belong without having to go through these kinds of experiences. What will happen next? What will be the next chapter in this mother's story, in her family's story? We don't know. But what I do know is that we can be present to it. We can keep ourselves open to what's happening. And we can find places where we can do whatever it is we can so that this becomes a people's land, truly. A land of belonging. A land for all.